So, you've just been diagnosed with diabetes. No pasta, no pizza, no bread, no lounging, not too much fruit, more exercise, more protein, less carbohydrate. But what kind of carbohydrates should I be eating? Okay, what if I told you it's okay to eat what makes you happy? We're going to take baby steps together here. In this video, we'll go over the very basics of carb counting and how it applies to you as a person with diabetes. I'm a registered nurse, certified diabetes care and education specialist, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes for over 20 years. My goal is to provide women with the tools and strategies they need to uncomplicate their diabetes management and spend time doing the things they love. Today, we are going to go over the basics of carb counting. So we'll talk about different types of carb counting, insulin to carb ratios, and how to read a nutrition label. So there are some different types of carb counting. One type of carb counting for people with diabetes is called the exchange system. This is great for people who are just starting out or for those who tend to eat the same types of foods pretty regularly. But in the exchange system, foods with a similar amount of carbohydrates per serving size are grouped together. The foods within each list can be exchanged for one another during the meal. And you end up with about the same amount of carbohydrates per meal. One carbohydrate exchange equals 15 grams of carbohydrates. Your provider or dietitian will help you choose a carb exchange goal. You can mix and match different exchanges to reach that goal each day. For example, if your goal is 45 grams of carbohydrate per meal, you can eat 3 exchanges of carbohydrates at each meal. Downside of this method is there is a little less flexibility and you can't account for the effects of fat and protein on blood sugar. Another type of carb counting is using insulin to carb ratios. This is a formula that is customized to fit the insulin needs for each person. You may use one or multiple insulin to carb ratios as your insulin sensitivity changes throughout the day. An example of an insulin to carb ratio is 1 to 8. This means 1 unit of insulin per 8 grams of carbohydrates. So for every 8 grams of carbohydrates, you would need 1 unit of insulin. If I ate 16 grams of carbohydrates, I would then need 2 units, and so on and so forth. The downside of this method is it requires nutrition label reading and a bit of math, but it lets you be more precise and can allow you to account for changes in insulin sensitivity, whether that's through stress or maybe at breakfast time you tend to be a little bit more insulin resistant, time in the month changes. You can have a different insulin to carb ratio for those different times during the day or different times in the month where you may need more or less insulin. This is the type of carb counting method we'll look at today specifically. To count carbohydrates using a nutrition label, we have to look at 3 different things: the serving size, the number of servings per container, as well as the grams of total carbohydrate per serving. The total carbohydrate tells how many grams of carbohydrates are in one serving. Be careful when reading the label. There can be more than 1 serving in the package, so if you eat more than 1 serving, you will need to multiply the grams of carbohydrates accordingly. So let's take a closer look at some examples of nutrition labels and how to use your insulin to carb ratio to calculate how much insulin you'll need.
All right, let's look at a nutrition facts labeled together. This is what one looks like, and you typically will see it on the back of a packaged meal or a type of food. You may see them on the internet when you're looking up a type of food or meal. So they are very common. This is what they look like in the United States. They probably will look pretty different in individual countries, but they generally have similar sorts of information on them that apply. So when you get a nutrition facts label, what I want you to look at first are 3 targets. The first one I want you to look at is at the top here. It'll tell you how many servings are in each container. So if it's a bag of chips or a box of cereal, which is what this looks like to me, then it will tell you that there are 8 servings in each box of cereal. The second target I want you to look at is right underneath, and that is the serving size. So this tells you how to measure each serving. So there are 2 parts to it usually. There's the cups or tablespoons, and then right next to it we have the other type of measurement, which is, this is best used if you have a food scale. And if you're trying to decide, like, I don't even have any measuring cups, I don't have a food scale, which one should I get? I would highly recommend getting a food scale. It just makes it a lot easier to count calories, carbohydrates, fat. In our case, carbohydrates though, just because you're gonna get a way more precise reading and measurement than you would with measuring cups or the measuring spoons. The third target I want you to look at is down here, and it is the total carbohydrate. The other macros and the calories, these are all super important, but since we're just talking about carb counts for right now, we're just going to focus on those 3 targets. So the carb count is, on this one, 37 grams per 1 serving. So anytime you're looking down here, all of the stuff down here, you can see it's amount per 1 serving. So that means total carbohydrates in 1 serving is 37 grams. Now that also means that 2/3 of a cup of cereal, or 55 grams of the cereal, is 37 grams. Let's say you are really super duper hungry though, and you have 2 servings of the cereal. Then we're gonna multiply our 37 grams by 2. So 37 times 2 is 74, and so now we know how many grams of carbohydrates are in 2 servings of cereal, as we often end up having more cereal than the sad suggested serving here of 2/3 of a cup. This is another example of a type of nutrition facts label. You may see these more often than the other one when you're like eating snacks. We're assuming, so this says pretzels, but you'll see the carb count is really high for 3 pretzels. So I don't know if these are just gigantic pretzels or something. But let's first just highlight our 3 targets here. So remember, the first thing I want you to look at is this top half, which shows us that there are 3 servings in the bag of pretzels. And then the serving size tells us what 1 serving is. So it's 3 pretzels. And then the last thing we wanted to look at was that total carb count. So what makes this nutrition label different is the fact that we have 2 little sections here instead of 1. But it's nice because now we don't have to do math. So if we just wanted to do 1 serving, it'll tell us that there is 23 grams of carbs in 1 serving. And then over here, if we just got crazy and ate the whole bag of gigantic pretzels, then it already adds it up for us, and it's 69 grams. So it's definitely a bit more helpful if you have a nutrition facts label like this. Otherwise, you just do a little bit of extra math, which is certainly a pain, but what can you do? Now, let's pretend like we have been prescribed by our doctor an insulin to carb ratio. So remember, an insulin to carb ratio is the amount of insulin needed to cover a certain amount of carbohydrates. And typically we're just looking at 1 unit of insulin per a number of grams of carbohydrates. And remember, you can have multiple ones, but we'll just pretend we just have one. So let's say that our provider endocrinologist decided that our insulin to carb ratio we're going to start with is 1 to 8. So this means that I need 1 unit of insulin to cover 8 grams of carbohydrates. This does not mean that you have to eat 8 grams of carbohydrates forever, and that's all you get. If you eat more than that, then basically what you'll do is take this number here, the 8 here, so the second number in the ratio, and you just divide the total carb count of your meal. So it's super easy if it's 8, because we just do 8 divided by 8 is 1 unit, right? If I eat something with 16 grams of carbs, then this is our total carb count, then I divide with my little ratio number there, and that would, easy math, give us 2 units, right? To cover 16 grams of carbs, and so on and so forth. So let's say I'm eating 1 serving of this meal, or these pretzels, these gigantic pretzels. I'm just weirded out that it's 3 pretzels or 23 grams of carbs. Maybe I just don't eat pretzels very often, but let's say we're eating 3 pretzels. That is 23 grams of carbs. So our total carb count is 23 grams, and we're going to take our magic insulin to carb ratio there and divide it by 8, and that will give us like close to 3 units, right? It's like 2.7 or something like that. So we like to round up, so we'll say 3 units to cover those 3 gigantic pretzels. One more example. So we'll go in here and highlight those 3 targets. 16 servings per container. The serving size is 1 tablespoon. And our total carbohydrate count is 17 grams. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to pretend our provider said that our insulin to carb ratio is 1 to 15. So we need 1 unit for every 15 grams of carbs. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I actually want to have 2 tablespoons of whatever this is. Remember that our per serving is 17 grams and we want to have 2. So we're going to go ahead and take this 17 and multiply it by 2. 17 grams times 2 equals 34 total grams in what we plan on eating. And our insulin to carb ratio, remember, is 1 to 15. So we're going to take this magical number here and put it under 34. We're going to divide 34 by 15, and that gives us something like 2.2 something or other, right? Give ourselves 2 units of insulin for those 2 tablespoons, which is 2 servings.
So this was an introduction to carbohydrate counting by reading a nutrition facts label. In future videos, we'll go over how to account for foods without a label, as well as carb counting at restaurants, because that can be a little bit different. You don't always have a nutrition label. As I record these videos, I will link them in the description box below. Carb counting is a great way to lower your A1C and just overall blood sugar levels, just making sure that we're matching up that insulin to the carbohydrates. If you'd like to learn more about some of my tips and tricks for lowering that A1C that don't require a keto diet or anything crazy, you can go download my free guide at www.givemesomesugar.coach/A1C for some extra ideas and information on that. If you have any questions, please see the description box and get in touch with me via email or Instagram at GiveMeSomeSugarDiabetes, and I'm happy to go over any questions you might have. I will talk to you later in another video, and I hope that this one was helpful for you. Happy carb counting!